That meeting encapsulates a debate that has Americans across the political spectrum trying to get a handle on right now. Aren't we free to express our opinions, and what are the limits when we do say those things and where we say them? What are the repercussions as well when we cross those lines? To help get answers to those questions, we're bringing in John Dipippa. He is the Dean Emeritus at University of Arkansas Little Rock's Bowen School of Law professor. Let's do first things first here. Okay. What makes up, give us a quick look at what the First Amendment is and says.
Well, it's interesting. The First Amendment contains 5 different freedoms: speech, press, assembly, petition, and religion. But except for religion, most of them have now been combined under the general headline of freedom of speech. And the First Amendment only applies to governments, state, federal, or local. It doesn't apply to private individuals. So First Amendment rights, properly speaking, are only exercised or protected from government harm.
Right there, Congress shall make no law, basically.
That's right. Now, over the years, through the 14th Amendment, the court has said those freedoms also apply to states, not just Congress. So the states also have to abide by the First Amendment.
So don't be making any laws you there in your state capitals that would do the same thing that Congress can't do. Now, we know there are differences and there are nuances, and we like to say, hey, this is a free country, I can say what I want. But that's not always the case, as we've seen this past week for a comedian like Jimmy Kimmel, or in the past, a comedian like Roseanne Barr. What are the differences that someone even as high profile as Jimmy Kimmel faces?
So the first thing to remember is the First Amendment applies to government action. Private individuals are not protected by the First Amendment. So a private company can fire somebody, depending on their contract, for any reason, even if they exercise speech. But what can't happen is the government can't come in and tell a private party to fire somebody. And so there's a lot of things you have to be careful with. So Roseanne, for example, was fired because the company didn't like what she said. It's not clear what went on with Jimmy Kimmel, but there was some discussion by the FCC chair which seemed to put some pressure on ABC to fire him.
And that would be a government action, but I mean,
that's different. That's right.
What would ABC have had to have done if they stood by Kimmel and hadn't suspended him?
Well, here's what would happen. If ABC had said, we're not going to suspend him, or puts him back on the air, and then the government takes some action against them, disciplines them, changes their license, does something that harms them, some government action, then ABC can sue the government for violation of ABC's First Amendment rights.
Now, more nuance comes. We saw that live shot of the teacher and the meeting up in Russellville. Mm-hmm. There's a government employee of a school district, who said things that even Jimmy Kimmel admitted last night that he regretted some of the things that he said in his monologue now. This is a person with far less visibility, but a job that obviously parents in Russellville would consider important. What protections or non-protections, limits does a teacher have in this case?
Public employees, including teachers, don't have the same full, robust First Amendment rights that private citizens do. They do have First Amendment rights. And so the way the court has determined to do this is they've said, is the person speaking as a private citizen? Are they speaking on a matter of public concern? And then if they are, the government has to show that before they discipline them, that the harm to the government's workplace outweighs the interest the person has in speaking. And so each of those cases is going to be a little different because each job is different, each circumstance is different, each workplace is different. You can't predict in advance how they come out, because what you have to know is exactly how disruptive to the workplace was that speech.
Disruptive to the workplace,
but
not necessarily the public forum. So you could have, if, say, a governor says that a law professor has done the same thing as that teacher, and how much of a role how loud that voice of criticism or outrage is in deciding whether or not they're protected or not.
Sure. I mean, if you think about the situation with the law professor, we had the governor and other constitutional officers weigh in and demand her firing. Well, this law professor is also a public employee and works for a public entity. So the public entity is sort of stuck here. Just like the FCC can't force ABC or coerce them to violate somebody's rights, the governor can't either. So what's important is, how does this all play out in the workplace? There's a recent case in this circuit, the 8th Circuit. A fireman in Forest City posted an anti-abortion meme on his Facebook post, and it was a fetus with a noose around its neck. And people objected. They said that's violent imagery, it's racist. He got fired, and the 8th Circuit said, well, you know, you didn't show that there was any harm to his workplace. Yes, people complained. Yes, it was offensive. Yes, he probably shouldn't have said that, but it doesn't matter. You can't fire somebody just because the government doesn't like that person's viewpoint.
It's going to be disappointing to some people to hear that when we see the violence apparently escalating. You can try and put a pin on when the violence started to escalate and who might have prompted it, but that's gotta, you've wrestled with this your whole career, of how strongly you stand behind the First Amendment, knowing that the environment right now just feels different than it is.
Well, it feels different, but I think it's a stretch to say that rhetoric is leading to violence. Rhetoric might be offensive, might be intemperate, but the Supreme Court said many years ago that the only speech you can punish, if there's violence after it, is if the speaker deliberately, directly incited violence. And it can't just be violence in the future, it has to be imminent. The First Amendment asks us to tolerate a lot of stuff. And a lot of what we have to tolerate is offensive, vulgar, coarse, even violent imagery. But the First Amendment protects people. Now, I don't think we're talking about that kind of violent discussion or those violent comments in any of the things I've seen about local cases.
You touched on tolerance, though. We're going to talk more about that. We've got more voices to hear from, but Dean Dipippa, I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks
so
Rolly.
much. We're going to take a break. We'll have more right after this break. First Amendment and the limits and rights that it confers upon all of us, but as we can see, the words in that document play out differently in real life. So for more and another voice to add to this, I'm bringing in Professor Robert Steinbuch, who also is over at Bowen School of Law, and you know firsthand, you've tried and won and lost First Amendment cases as well as employment cases. So I want to ask you, as you're also a member of the press because you've got a regular column in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, I want to ask you, the pendulum when it comes to these debates is clearly swung over to the right side of the political spectrum. An assassination will do that.
That's right.
Is that because of the last election, do you think? Or is there something different going on in the environment right now?
Well, I think it's not only the last election, but I think we've been moving towards a more polarized environment. And so I think when the right is in control, we are heavily right, and when the left is in control, we are heavily left. And I think this bespeaks the issue that you raised with John before the break, and that is when people are making these comments, they may not be able to be regulated by the government, but are they a problem? Yeah, they're a problem, right? The comments that people made about Charlie Kirk, no doubt elicited such feelings amongst a fringe element that one of those fringe elements acted through an assassination. And that's what we need to be careful with. Not government regulating those comments, but as a society, determining whether or not we think that's the way people in leadership should be talking, demonizing people, calling people Nazis, saying that they deserve to die. Those types of comments are legal. They're permitted under the First Amendment, but they're dangerous and they're harmful.
But who makes the call and when they're dangerous?
Right, not
and
the
especially
government.
when it's a mob that's making those distinctions.
That's right. The government doesn't make that call, but we, as journalists, and we in the academy, can opine on those issues and say, look, maybe that kind of rhetoric doesn't help. Maybe we shouldn't be calling people like Charlie Kirk a Nazi. He wasn't a Nazi, so let's not call him that. Nazi means something very specific, and when we group people like that, we are, much like your introductory question suggested, polarizing the environment.
The right found itself trying to defend some uncomfortable positions because of what some might say was accused of incitement to riot on January 6th a few years ago. Do you see, from a legal point of view, a difference between how people reacted in the moment to Charlie Kirk's assassination to how people were reacting to the information they were getting after the election in 2020?
Well, I see some similarities, in fact, right? I think that there were clearly people in the January 6th riot who were violent and aggressive and inappropriate and criminal in their behavior and deserving of punishment. And of course, this murderer who killed Charlie Kirk is deserving of punishment. I think people who are celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk are not deserving of government punishment, but they're deserving of our disapproval. We should say to them, look, you can disapprove of Charlie Kirk, you can not like what he had to say, but don't celebrate his murder. Don't celebrate the murder of other people, and don't call him and other people Nazis when they're not.
But when you're a champion of the First Amendment,
Yes.
As you are,
Yes.
do you worry about who gets to make that call of when this is registering disapproval and when it's outright pressure, like is coming on your colleague, the law professor at Bowen?
Well, that's a great question, right? So I think when the FCC chairman made those comments to ABC, he was going past that line because he was talking about his regulatory authority. However, when the governor, the AG, and the lieutenant governor merely expressed their own opinions, as they did in this case, they did not exert pressure on the law school. They expressed their opinions. I think that stays within the line.
Not sure how many people, or I guess you could admit there might be some disagreement
I'm
of how
sure
much
there's
pressure
disagreement.
comes from
I'm
the
sure
governor
there's-
when she
yeah.
expresses her opinion. My last thought on this is, it feels like we're in a Russian nesting doll of like, it's that person's fault. Well, this person took away that person's rights.
Right.
Who's going to be the bigger side in this, I guess, to say, no, it's got to stop here?
I don't have an answer to that, and it's all fact dependent, right? That is, what is the wrong that you're viewing, and how do you view that wrong? Much like you just said a moment ago, different people will draw that line in different places. And going back to the very first question that you posed, we are in a far more divided environment than we have been in the past.
Hopefully we can change that. Hopefully we advance the ball a little bit tonight. Professor, thank you for coming in.